recording now. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jalen Carter. I'm the Community Program Manager at the Tulane Innovation Institute. We are excited today to talk to you about a very important aspect of entrepreneurship, and that is bootstrapping and grant writing. We are extremely excited to have a local expert, Dr. Frazier, lead our session today. Here's an overview on Dr. Frazier. So Dr. Frazier is a double alum of Tulane University. She received her MBA and PhD from Tulane University. She has over 15 years of experience in adipose biology, regenerative medicine, and management. She is the CEO and founder of Abstract Ventures, an adjunct professor at the Tulane School of Science and Engineering, and the president, CEO, and founder of Obatala Sciences. Dr. Frazier is one of those people where if I were to read her whole bio and accomplishments, it'd probably be the entire 45 minutes. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pass the floor over to Dr. Frazier. Thank you so much for being here today. We're really looking forward to what you have for us.
Thank you so much, Jalen. It's a pleasure to again have this seminar and to share some of our experiences. As we mentioned earlier, please feel free to chime in with questions or thoughts that you'd like to have some expounding on. This as a second iteration of this seminar is meant to be a little less formal, more informal, and more engaging. And so I'm looking forward to this. And so, yes, as Jalen mentioned, I'm the co-founder, president, and CEO of Obatala Sciences. We are a biotechnology toolkit firm that's based in New Orleans, Louisiana, on the University of New Orleans campus. We are promoting diversity in research, and the way we're doing that is by bringing data from patients that represent more diversity in the context of therapies, screening therapies, and obesity and diabetes. And so what we're going to talk about today is bootstrapping in the context of grant writing and other sources. And so brief conflict of interest statement. I'm also, as mentioned before, adjunct assistant professor in the School of Medicine and Science and Engineering, and on the Board of Trustees for Tulane. And so we're going to jump right into the various funding streams that are highlighted in a broad categorical sense for sources of capital when it comes to funding your business, and then dive into the bootstrapping grants as two specific areas, and then tools for implementation of those. And so, as stated before, there's this whole exciting stage of having the idea, and now what? You need the funding, you need the capital to support the commercialization of that idea, the bringing of that idea to the market, and how do you fund it? And, funding the business, there are various ways to look at that from a capital and a source perspective. There are also resources that extend well beyond the capital that can be quite helpful, quite useful. And for each of those specific avenues, there are considerations. And so I'll highlight some of the pros and cons as well as we talk through them. And it's important to understand those different ways to support your business so that you don't fall into traps. Some traps that are glaringly obvious or set yourself up for failure. And so with those funding streams, I'll highlight that these are statistics from earlier this year with the census, the US Census, over 500,000 new businesses per month estimated in terms of being started or founded in the US. About 6,000 of those businesses get angel investment. And we're talking about on an annual basis, about 100,000 businesses per year get SBA loans. And so, 78% of those 500,000 new businesses per month in the US are estimated to use founder funding. Everyone doesn't have founder funding to contribute to as capital to start their business. And so, when we look at these various streams, they include bootstrapping, grants, what we're going to talk about, but also investment from angels, venture capital, which is its own, I'll say, set of nuances, but loans and crowdfunding are other sources. And we also have information on these sources of funding within our modules that are presented within a bioentrepreneurship course that the company runs. And so what is bootstrapping? In its essence, it's the minimalistic business culture approach to starting your company. And, it really is, when you think about the definition and where the saying came from in the 19th century, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, it's looking at what the available resources are and how do you use those resources in a way that helps you to lay the foundation for building your business. A self-sustaining process that is supposed to proceed without a heavy dependence on external input, like some of the other sources that I mentioned, the angel capital, investment, and those types of capital. And so when we look at the methods, they are diverse. They can include the owner financing, which I mentioned a bit earlier. So, use of your personal income and savings. But there's also, personal debt. Routinely, there is sort of an acquiring of the activities and resources in a way of small things to materials, support in the way of the documents or paperwork and accrued on personal debt, credit cards. Sweat equity, which is the contribution to the company in a form of your time and effort, that does have value. And in the case of Obatala Sciences, our team has put in quite a substantial amount of sweat equity, our founders. And I think anyone who is heavily invested in seeing their business get off the ground, they will by default put in a lot of sweat equity. Operating costs, one of those methods is keeping those costs as low as possible. And we call that, in the context of the grander scheme of things, having a lean operation, a lean business, where you're looking at those costs and alternatives to what could be seen as sort of the mainstream approach to things. Looking at it from the standpoint of your inventory, that isn't always considered, but a fast turnaround of inventory is reducing the cost to you for maintaining that inventory. And so that's a part of the bootstrapping. And then, subsidy finance, government cash payments, or tax reductions, those can be quite impactful as well. One example, in the case of Obatala, we are a biotechnology company that does have research and development activities going on a yearly basis. And within that context, we apply for federal funding. When we are successful at receiving that federal funding, we can apply to the state for research and development tax credits. And those tax credits can be essentially converted into cash, where we work with entities that are looking to get tax credits and deductions that they can count towards their own taxes for their businesses, in the case of media, for example, and production. And so we can get those credits converted to cash in a way of 81 cents or 85 cents on the dollar that we spend in our research and development. And so any way that you can leverage those types of resources, there's the same thing, the equivalent in the media and film industry. In different industries, there are certain subsidies that are available and incentives that are provided by the state and local governments to support your activities and your operations there. And then there's revenue. Being a revenue generating business is also something that can be quite helpful, of course, in terms of supporting your survival. And then as you look to into that growth stage of the business that originates from sales or services, in our case, again, the company had a contract, I will say, that preluded our letters of incorporation. And so we found out there was a need in the market based on a customer interviews that we performed. And one of those customers, the 50th customer that we interviewed, said, I would like to try this. I'm willing to buy it. And that turned into a contract. And that helped to support the cost on the legal front for us incorporating the business. And so revenue, of course, can help. And so when we think about the ways to bootstrap, if you're saying, okay, well, how do I go about this? Because it's quite diverse in terms of approach. It could be simple, maybe, maybe not. But in essence, it is, hey, let's execute on this big idea. And we'll dive into what that means literally in a moment. Focus on your profits. Are there any profits that can help you to sustain your business, sustain your growth? How can you expand your team skills in a way that, again, is lean and efficient for you in terms of having lower costs to you? And then continue to grow as a business professional. We all have different experiences that in some way help us. It's just a matter of us thinking about it in that context. For example, I grew up in my mother's beauty salon. She owned her salon. Throughout my high school days, that was where I spent after school. And I didn't realize that I was absorbing some of the basic business principles, some of the fundamentals that would be helpful in bootstrapping my business. And that's a biotech business. For example, balancing the books, having that interaction with our customers where they understand that we're customer centric, that we actually do care about them and their needs. And we're here to address a need that they have, a pain point, and starting there. That turned out to be the best revenue generating piece that I learned, independent of the field of business. And so we'll dive into these. With executing on the big idea, in essence, what we're asking is, what is the North Star? What is your ultimate goal? And what are the smaller things, smaller ideas that you can approach and tackle to get there? So what are those incremental milestones? Are they feasible? Are they within a reasonable time frame? And taking each of those and, literally looking at them within a context of miniature targets that you can work towards accomplishing, and then setting a plan to reach those smaller targets, you will, ultimately reach that North Star. And then execute on each of those smaller goals. So again, taking it back to my example with us starting Obatala, we had a goal of interviewing 50 customers, asking them a question, and that is, what are you doing right now? Another question, what's your pain point? What do you wish you had access to? What could help you to execute your research better, to be more effective in your job? And then taking a step further, would you be interested in learning more about what it is that we have? After that, the incremental goals were, having this technology that we wanted to bring to market. It's now the small things, such as making sure our certifications were in line, making sure our registrations were in place, making sure we had an accountant and we had a legal team and we had all those fundamental elements that could help stand up this business. And it's literally working towards those incremental goals where we ended up in a place where now there's a company in place. Now, what do we do next? And that was focusing on the profits. What's the fastest route to revenue generation? And often when this is done as an exercise, there is a realization that there are ways to operate even more efficiently. There are ways to start to incorporate some of the basic ideas that you have about other applications that are not as obvious that can apply directly to your business. For example, one of the products that we manufacture is a biomaterial. We say it's like jello, and it supports the growth of cells in 3 dimensions. We tried multiple ways to manufacture this product, and one of the things that we found out was very valuable as equipment is a reused kitchen appliance. We're able to take a kitchen appliance and use that in a way of grinding this tissue to manufacture this product. It was cheaper, it was much more efficient, it was quicker. Cost, from a cost perspective, we needed to get something that helped us to increase our profits, our profit margin. And so, that's just one example, but there are other, ways to sort of think about this as an exercise. What's the fastest route to revenue generation? And sometimes it takes having a slower growth model. Sometimes it's understanding that you may need to set your target for the year as a 20% year-over-year growth once you start generating those profits, or 10%, even 5%. But at least that allows you to have sustainability, predictability in terms of what your income can be, what that revenue can be, and then start to plan around how quickly you do want to grow. Looking at the customer base was also a very good exercise, and diving into what is your real customer base? Who are you serving? And there are all types of books around this, in terms of knowing your market, but truly identifying what your market base is, who is that target customer, and then how do you grow that? There are some models that will have a very quick numbers game in terms of approach, where I'm going to reach out to 50 people, a day, or 100 people a day. But, doing it in a way that's feasible, that again addresses your needs and your capabilities, will always bring you a greater reward. And so it's getting to know each of those individuals that become your customers, and building on that, where word of mouth can become also a great revenue generator. And then building the revenue models. So those revenue models, when we look at the profit side of things, there are diverse ways of generating your revenue, where, again, taking it to our example, initially with Obatala, with markets that are similar, that have higher barriers to entry and slow adoption rates and slow adoption curves. So basically your target customer needs to be educated. They don't quite get what you're doing. Sometimes it's better to take a step back and say, okay, what tools can we use to look at how to bring in revenue? And so initially we started out with bringing a service to the market, but then we started to expand that in terms of our toolkit of revenue models. Now we're exploring licenses. We are exploring supply agreements. And some of it's as simple as having a conversation with, again, knowing your customer and their needs, and saying, hey, we appreciate you and appreciate the value that you're bringing. We want to continue to bring value to you. Would you be interested in locking this relationship in for a year at a time, right? Or beyond that. And so building those revenue models, again, as a part of this exercise, I think brings tremendous value. And, when we think about that, it takes a team to do it. As much as the founders are passionate about, building your business, about what it is that you're doing, It takes a well-versed team to really tackle this in an efficient way and to build a sustainable company. And so, having your core area of expertise, I think, will bring you very far. But very quickly, what you'll see is of course, that you don't know everything, and that's something that I think can help you in terms of identifying the core team members that can support your foundation building, that can support your team, and that have an alignment with respect to the core values that you'd like to see with your business in terms of building that company culture. And so as you think of it as a company, an entity that's beyond yourself, those are things to keep in mind, right? It includes passion, resilience, perseverance, and courage for risk tolerance. And the individuals that you align yourself with, who you recruit to that core team, can help you in those times of needing to have that greatest risk tolerance and that perseverance. So in that context is recognizing your weak points. Fundamentally, again, as an example, when I first set out to build Obatala Sciences, the thing that I was quickly aware of was there was more work in a day than what I could handle. There was more work in a day than what my co-founders, Drs. Jeffrey Gimbel and Ziying Wu, and myself collectively could handle. And there will always be, continued things there to do. But it also helped us to say, okay, we are 3 scientists and serial entrepreneurs in terms of that mix. It would be good for us to recruit people who have strengths in commercialization, who have strengths on the legal side, who have strength in the finance side. And so it was looking at, a person that could help support and lead the operations. And we set our executive team to incorporate that, a person that would lead the scientific, and for you, whatever that technical skill set would be for your product, or to lead your product development, or even to lead your revenue activities, like a revenue officer. If sales isn't your strong point, or if business development isn't your strong point, which requires identifying those markets that would be applying your technology or your product in the most efficient way. And so, at the earliest stages, I would highly recommend looking at your core team. And in that context, some of them can be recruited with a combination type of contract. So again, keeping that lean business model in mind and cost, efficiency. For example, our chief administrative officer has done a phenomenal job, and he works with the company with a combination of cash and stock options that are issued to him. And, that reduces the cost to the company. And so sometimes when you have someone who is a leader in their space, they are senior, sometimes recently retired experts, they are willing to work with you by providing in-kind hours or getting some sort of stock allocation in lieu of cash, if that's the structure and framework that you have your business set up in. If not, if you don't have that structure with, allocating options, there are other ways, and people are willing truly to help on that front. And so continuing to grow as a business person, as a founder, your core values will impact those of your team in so many ways that are quite substantial, and that isn't necessarily appreciated until a company survives many of the storms, and there's years down the line, and you look back and say, wait a minute, this company culture, what is it? And so it's good to take the time to think about that as well. While you're thinking of all these other impactful areas of the business, How do you generate your revenue? Who your target customer base is? How do you grow that? It's also important to think about, okay, here's the environment that I want to grow. Here's the the culture in general that we want to have, and to outline that. And so those core values, for us, it included some of these aspects, but commonly we see things like resourcefulness, accountability, enthusiasm, some of those things. But it's really to speaking to those values that you want to see as folks operate and you grow that company. And so who should consider bootstrapping? In general, companies that don't require large influxes of capital at that moment. And I'll also say it's not one of those things where once you decide to bootstrap the business for whatever reason, whether it's contributing to the foundations, or you're at a stage of a pivot, you are surviving a bad economic status, and I'm speaking nationally, internationally, globally. It doesn't matter there could be a moment where you're bootstrapping. It doesn't have to be the lifetime of the business. And sometimes you can decide you want that to be your business model, where you have a slow growth business where revenue is driving the activities that you get done at the business. And so it can be a combination of that fast growth and a bootstrapping. Companies with business models and products that are conducive to flexibility are very well suited for bootstrapping, right? And you have that time to grow. And then the serial entrepreneur companies, where the founder has money from the sale of a former company, or there is some reserve there that you'd like to invest in a company and looking to really, really grow that as efficiently as possible, and to maximize the return on that initial amount of money that you put into starting that next company. And then, teams and founders who can be resourceful and versatile in approach. During times of high economic stress, it is truly a skill set, being flexible and being able to pivot and respond to the market, that can help with survival as well, if you think about bootstrapping and the pros and cons. And so when to bootstrap, I mentioned that there are ebbs and flows, and sometimes it may be a point in time when you bootstrap, but operating lean when possible is always recommended for a startup. And so taking that time to understand your costs to develop your product, leveraging your partners. For Obatala, as an example, we leverage core facilities. So we have relationships with academic institutions, the local academic institutions, and even some nationally. And they have core facilities where we can send some material, and they'll test that material at a cost to us that's cheaper than us acquiring that equipment. And so that can span across multiple disciplines, right? And, one of the things that you can keep in mind in that context is partners can exist throughout different areas of the business, right, in different categories. So we also have leveraged, for example, the Louisiana Economic Development, LED. They have accelerator-like programs. They have a CEO roundtable. It's free to participate in those types of things. And there are a lot of resources, several resources that are shared with the participants, with the founders, with the CEOs, that can help in the areas of marketing, that can help in various aspects as you're looking to grow. And then one of the cheapest things you can do is to perform customer discovery. It is, one of the most rewarding things to get that feedback as well, because then you'll have that insight into the market in ways that others may not. And so know before you grow, understanding your market by talking to your customer base is one of the greatest things you can do. Understand the best practices. So what's the standard? right now? And how do you compare to that? The core issues and how other companies are solving those problems and where you fit into that. What is your value proposition? And really knowing, where your greatest value is, it sets you apart from the others, and it opens the space for you to perform and to operate. And so it informs your strategy for building as well and growth. And so when we take all of that into consideration, and look at the pros and the cons, advantages and disadvantages of bootstrapping, it's cheap, so cost, efficient. There's a low cost of entry, so in terms of the investment of your time, your energy, your resources, you are your own boss, and there's a freedom and flexibility there to, again, respond and pivot and to the market and to the indicators that you get in terms of where the need is, but also ways that you can support the sustainability piece of your business. On the other side of that, having that flexibility comes with a cost. And there's the risk for cash flow problems. When I was mentioning use the term ebbs and flows, I was referring partially to that as well, where there are times what we see, for example, in our business is a seasonality. And there's a seasonality to many businesses where there are times when your customers have a bolus of cash or resources and they're ready and they need to lock in their products for the rest of the year, or they need to purchase materials. And then there are times where they won't have it. And so understanding that and how it impacts your business and your operations is important. There's a risk of equity issues with co-founders. Sometimes if there's a team that starts a business, and again, we're looking at a structure where there is, this can go twofold. One in which there are there's a stock allocation and an employment stock agreement. Sometimes there can be issues, but on the equity side, in terms of just the time, energy that is put into that business, sometimes there is, a break in the set of expectations versus the performance of the founders. And then you're there to figure it out as that team. That's bootstrapping. And then a high risk of failure and stress levels that can be associated with that. And then there are some very strong brands that, have bootstrapped, and it's not really fully appreciated that was a part of their founding. That was a part of their foundations, including Apple, Clorox, which is a household brand. Many of these are household brands, and bootstrapping helped them to reach their level of revenue generation, whereby they started to then say, okay, now we can focus on growth. And so we'll switch to the grant side, which can come from many sources. And those sources include personal, private foundations, and then government, which extends from the federal to the state side, state level, and other government-backed entities. And when we look at these, Obatala has experience with government and at the state and federal levels. And they come in different forms and they have different requirements for each of them. For those, we look at one of the most important things, one of the most important aspects that need to be considered, and that is the technology, and are you protecting it? That adds to your value, and it truly does speak to what you're applying to the funding for. So if you're applying for federal funding, applying for state funding, it is to advance a technology or to manufacture a product or to bring a service to the market. And so what is that? What is the value around that? And so for businesses like ours, biotechnology businesses, but in other areas, that means there is, if you've started out as a research project, then you need to transfer that technology and undergo that process from the university to your company. And so that's technology transfer. And so that essentially is what I've described, a process of moving data, designs, inventions, materials, all of those aspects, technical know-how or trade secrets from one organization to another. And in the case of a biotech business, that may be from a university to a business. But there are cases and instances in which a business can license a technology from another business if you find something of interest. And there are 4 levels of interaction that are typically involved: knowledge and technology creation, which starts off with that project, the sharing and dissemination of that, the implementation of it, and the commercialization aspect, which usually happens at that team level or that individual founder level when you decide to bring it to the market. And so that technology transfer is important for a small business because it allows a clean and clear understanding of who owns the intellectual property or the value associated with that innovation. And without that clear distinction, it will be difficult to protect your invention, to establish a competitive advantage in your field, and really position yourself for and put that stamp of that brand for who you are, bringing it to the world. And it'll be difficult to raise money. It'll be difficult to, again, as I spoke about the federal and state-based grants and contracts, it'll be difficult to bring in that money if you are not able to articulate, this is the value that we have, and this is how we're protecting it. So fundamentally, and then it will be difficult to generate revenue from the resulting product or service, because at some point, if you are not ensuring that you are free and clear, which is actually a legal term, to perform in the context of making that product, offering that service, having that contract service available, and someone else finds out that you've been doing it and it infringes on what they've been doing, then you won't be able to practice that if they go after you. You need to defend it. And so a plan to embark on technology transfer, if you are in that space of, again, bringing a product or service to market, it is valuable in terms of taking the time to embark on that, become acquainted, get that knowledge about where am I within this space. And again, there are legal resources that can be leveraged, in-kind resources. One thing to know, the New Orleans Bioinnovation Center sometimes has folks that come in from the local and national based legal teams like Baker Donaldson. They'll come and they'll give in-kind hours and meet with, people who are, even if you're thinking about founding a business, or if you think you have something that may be protectable, or you don't know at all, but you want to start a business, is sort of, they're open to having those discussions and providing that input. Likewise, on the accounting front, it was formerly Postlethwaite in Netterville, but now they were recently acquired. They also provide in-kind hours for those types of services. And so on the grant side, there's small business innovative research grants, technology transfer grants that support small businesses or technologies that are intended to be commercialized into for small businesses. And then there are foundation-based grants, and I mentioned the state-based resources, the research and development tax credits. And so pursuing grants, the value is their non-dilutive capital that can support the growth, the foundational research for your project to evolve into a commercial product. That example I gave earlier with customer service and how we had a contract before having our letters of incorporation, that did arise out of a grant that we received from the National Sciences Foundation. There was a requirement for us to perform customer discovery. And that led to the formation of Obatala Sciences, that led to the commercialization of the company. And so this non-dilutive capital can be quite impactful and supportive. Includes, proof of concept work that demonstrates there's a market for your solution, and pursuing it at the earliest stages of your startup can be quite valuable. On the side of grantsmanship, I won't dive into these as much, but I'm very happy and willing to follow up with anyone that has interest there, but there are specific nuances to grantsmanship and to being successful in grant writing that include, having specific actionable plans and articulating that in a way that the reviewers get it. And avoiding those common pitfalls include, at its core, communicating, reaching out to those individuals and entities that are there to support you. Program officers if you're applying for a federal program, for example, the NIH, NSF, those groups, they're there to provide support for you, and they can avoid a lot of time wasted if it isn't a fit or a good match. Grants.gov is a good resource for searching for some of these grants, and looking at, again, those in-kind core facilities, partner institutions that can help. And so, if nothing else, I will highlight today, make sure that if you are, positioning your business to apply for federal funding, or you think you can be a contractor of some sort for federal programs or labs or researchers or anything adjacent to that, make sure you do your registrations. So, give yourself 60 to 90 days in advance of initiating an application to just focus on those registrations: SAM.gov, SBIR.gov, Duns and Bradstreet, making sure that your city-based registrations are there, making sure that documentation and those registrations are in place. So that way, when you decide to embark on the process that is already very stressful of applying for a grant, that grantsmanship aspect, that your registrations are good. Your company is in a good place to do that. And so the SBIR.gov website, there are tremendous resources there for entrepreneurs in the way of understanding and approaching that process in general. And so when we think about the pros and cons, I mentioned that it's non-dilutive. You don't have to pay it back as a grant. There's that feel-good factor of you competing and successfully obtaining and being selected for this funding. There is an abundance of the funding in terms of the capital there. So, the budgets for these federal entities have been increased. So billions of dollars there available to support these activities. And it's targeted at businesses not supported elsewhere. And so it may come with free marketing as well. We've certainly benefited from our relationship with the NIH, where they have sponsored conference attendance and vendor shows and things like that. On the other side of it, they have very specific eligibility. It's time consuming to apply, and the grant award cycle is long. So from the time that you apply to the time that you're actually using these funds, expect a year, where it's 6 to 9 months for a federal in terms of notice of award, and then maybe 12 months when you're actually using those funds. And then it can have strings attached, and there's very high competition. Some, again, very well-known brands that have leveraged grant funding, and they have done a great job of doing that in a way to not only commercialize their products, bring a product to market, but also bring in venture capital that then help to grow their business. And so leverage in that context, this is my last slide, there are a lot of resources there locally here and nationally that are represented here that we have used, but that I also highly recommend, even if you're not in the biotech space, to get to know these entities. I mentioned multiple times the Louisiana Economic Development Agency, LED. the New Orleans Bioinnovation Center, if you're, of course, in that biotech space. But then Greater New Orleans, Inc. does have a lot of great resources as an economic development entity. Also, the New Orleans Business Alliance, those, three, LED, NOLA BA, and GNO Inc. have resources and funding that they can use to provide in-kind contributions for your business as well. Support, I would say. And, the America Seed Fund, I mentioned that, the SBIR, STTR, again, happy to follow up with anyone and provide resources there if that's of interest. And the Innovation Institute, of course, provides a wealth of information that can, help you in terms of those foundational things, understanding why technology transfer is important, when to embark on it, have those discussions, things like that. And then there are competitions like the Idea Village, Village X. There are competitions that we have participated in and leveraged that funding as well to support our growth in terms of capital. And so with that, I'll highlight in terms of the key takeaways, just consider there are various funding streams to support a startup, no matter what space you're in. And that bootstrapping and actually taking the time to go through that process can be rewarding, in a sense that you can identify those ways of operating lean and getting to your target market, understanding it very well. And so keep those methods in mind. What's the product? Who are your customers? What is their pain point? And this will help to inform your strategy. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions if we have time for it. But yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have time for questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Frazier.
Awesome. Awesome.
And y'all are welcome to either just shout your questions out or put them in the chat.
Again, I'll put up, I don't know if you wanted to go through that as well, or after.
Yeah, we'll take that after the questions.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. Yeah, so one thing I don't know is the folks who are on the call, feel free to sort of chime in, or on the webinar. Is anyone, how many business owners do we have? Does anyone have their business in? Sort of what space are you in? And likewise, if you're thinking about starting a business, what space are you in?
Well, I have a business that I started about 4 years ago, and now I was by myself, and now I'm looking into expanding the company to create more jobs, good jobs here in the community. So that's the whole plan.
Okay.
So, and that's how I met Jalen and the Tulane Innovation, and I'm learning, the process of where to get the money and how to do it and all that. So it's definitely very interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Kudos to you. Looking at first, you're contributing to the growth of the community and, contributing to the economic development piece as well, right? In terms of deciding to hire from the community. And so, when we think about those resources that I mentioned, definitely, I would say GNO Inc., NOLA BA, LED, they may be able to provide some support there in terms of other companies. So you may already, since you've been in business for some years, may already have things like the accounting, the legal, that kind of thing lined up. But, I mentioned some of those groups that offer in-kind hours for specific projects, like if there's something you'd like to get done. Likewise, the CEO, so aside from the CEO Roundtable that LED has, there's a program called Economic Gardening, and it is sponsored by the Edward Lowe Foundation. That is specifically providing resources to companies that are looking to expand, at the stage that you're at with hiring and on that front. And so they're willing to meet with you The Edward Lowe Foundation has a lot of, they have teams that can, focus on different things. So for example, if you would like to get some information on the workforce side, or if you would like to get information on the market side, any of those things, they'll do that work for you as well and work hand in hand with you to say, okay, to understand, where's your biggest need and how can they support that. So I would highly recommend, looking into that project. And a contact over there is Chris Kassan. He is, someone that also is in the growth stage, supporting growth stage companies. And so I think he would be a great person to reach out to.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Oh, yep, let's see some comments in the chat. All right. So Tanya, medical device, 2 companies, Ivy Safe Patch and Safe Push. Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Okay, and I see your question. What assistance is there specifically at Tulane for grant writing? All right, awesome. Yeah, Jalen, looks like a question for you. I am developing an idea for medical implementation of AI.
Sharon, feel free to jump in as well. We are more than happy to work with you through our idea bank and potentially put you in touch with some of our mentors that have experience with that. But we just love to hear more about this.
Louisiana also has Phase Zero SBIRS GTR awards. And so these are smaller grants for people who are really at the idea stage pretty early. So if you're really early in your process of developing that, we have a connection with the Louisiana Tech Transfer Office where they have resources to assist you in putting that application through. So would I please write it here in the chat? That's a lot to write. So what I'll do is I will put the link to our idea bank, which is sort of the front door to the Innovation Institute. And you can go in there. It'll take you about 30 seconds to type your name, your email address, and in the information box, just let us know that's what you need help with. And then we'll triage that intake and make sure you get the resources. So
yeah, and don't forget, we are going to send all of this out, including the transcript. So you'll have multiple ways to get this info.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll highlight that Obatala continues to apply for and receive Phase Zero awards to support when we're embarking on another grant application. So that, we apply for the Small Business Innovative Research grants. We first, when we're in sort of that stage of development, apply for a Phase Zero award, and that supports the time, effort that is required, the administrative cost to you for putting your grant proposal together, and can be helpful on that front. Yep, and Sharon put that information in there. So hopefully everyone is in attendance receive some helpful, information. If there's anything that you'd like me to expound on or us to expound on, feel free to follow up. I'm more than happy to sort of talk through different things. So our company has raised, I mentioned federal funding, Phase 1 and Phase 2, Small Business Innovative Research. We've applied for foundation grants, which are also an option. I would highly recommend looking at that if there's any in your space. And we've raised venture capital funding as well, both locally and abroad.
Awesome. So Dr. Frazier, if somebody wants to get in contact with you after this, is it best to email you, or what would be the best way?
Yes, I am putting my email address in the chat right now. And also or LinkedIn. I'm just Trivia Frazier. Feel free to connect there as well.
Awesome. Okay, well, if you could pull up that last slide, I think we're ready to wrap this webinar up. Thank you all so much again for joining us this morning to discuss bootstrapping and grant writing. I hope you found this presentation informative. Some of my takeaways for this are that there are a lot of perks to bootstrapping. Bootstrapping, in a nutshell, is a minimalistic business culture approach to starting a company. The goal is to have a self-sustaining process that is supposed to succeed without external input. A lot of the ways that you can do this are proactive. So you should be building your team comprehensively. You should be making sure that you can cut costs, and you should be building your business in a lean model. You should keep your North Star in mind, right? You should work on smaller ideas that can get you there, make sure that they're feasible within a reasonable time frame, and set up a plan to reach those smaller targets so that they're more realistic. When it comes to grant writing, there are grant options available through our local and national governments, such as SBIR, STTR funding. There are also foundation-based grants. Grants are great because they are non-dilutive, but they are kind of time-consuming. They ask for a lot, and you want to give yourself about 60 to 90 days in advance of starting an application for some grants. So, we are sending this out. Thank you again so much to Dr. Frazier. We hope you will join us for what's effectively our last event of the season before we all go away for the holidays, which is going to be our December 4th webinar, which is about free and low-cost marketing strategies with another local entrepreneur who we're really excited to have talk with us. But once again, thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone who celebrates, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.